Hello, here again. Now, it's the first week in March, and because this has been an extremely hectic couple of months since January, I've moved. Ed was sick. I had a paper to do for Schnitzer that took me the last couple months, and I am going to end in at the end of March, which will give us 5 weeks in March, and I it's quite near Easter. We usually stop at Easter, and so I think that would be a good time for me. I need a time where I just relax a little. I'll tell you, I love doing these Bible stories. I enjoy doing this. I really do. But it's a lot of work. And I am going to be 75. So I plan on teaching till I'm 105. After that, maybe I'll take a break. So you still have plenty of time. God willing. Anyway, we're going to do a lesson on Judges, on the story of Gideon, but first we're going to do a little snippet. And that's because I didn't really have enough time to bring this in last week. Last week we were learning about Deborah and Barak and the use of the word hand. It was used 6 times, and I was a little disappointed. I said, why isn't it used the 7th time? And then I read the next chapter, which is a poem about Genesis chapter 4 with Deborah and Barak. The story is set in poetic form. And we learned, of course, from the poem, we got really a hyper drastic picture of what went on as lightning came down the mountain. Remember that? There's a lot of puns with the names. And so we do know, because we know the name, what the name of Barak means. We understand that there was a storm. But if you don't know Barak's name and what it means, nor the name of Deborah's husband, lightning flashes, as she stayed at the top of the mountain, we might not realize that that is how God routed the enemy, as he routed the enemy, the Egyptians, at Mount Sinai. And remember, it's described as a Mount Sinai, Mount Tabor, and is described as Mount Tabor. Well, this week we're going to look at that word hand, because it is used 6 times. And in the poem, which is about jail, by the way, nothing in the poem, even though the poem was sung by Barak and Deborah, nothing in the poem concerning Barak, because Sisera was not sold into Barak's hand because of his dependency upon Deborah rather than on Deborah's word, which was the word of God. She was the one who brought the sweet judgments of God's word to the people and to Barak. So this week we're going to learn about Jael. She's the one who's honored, and so a portion of the poem from 24 to 27, that's 4 verses, is given over completely to Jael. So let's look at it and find our 7th hand. The most blessed of women should be Jael, mountain goat. the wife of Heber the Kenite. She should be the most blessed of women who live in tents. He, Sisera, asked for water. She, Jael, gave him milk. Of course she would give him milk. She's a mountain goat. In a bowl fit for important men. She served him curds. That's a milk product. Curds is a milk product just before it's made into cheese. Her hand, that's the same word, yod, that is used 6 times in the previous chapter. So now we have the 7th time. Her hand reached for the tent peg. A woman who used the tent peg in her hand and thus fulfills the promise, the prophecy made by Deborah, that Sisera would be sold into the hand of a woman. Her hand, yod, reached for the tent peg. Her right for the workman's hammer. Now the author purposefully doesn't put in there the word yod, the word hand in this line. He just says right. Now we, of course, in your Bibles, translate that as her right hand, but it's not said. Yod is not said. So yod is said 7 times, and the 7th time is about Jael using the tent peg in order to destroy Sisera and gain the honor that was prophesied. Her right hand, or her right for the workman's hammer. She hammered Sisera. Now listen to the descriptions. This is poetry, and poetry is a little outlandish, over the top sometimes, and I think the poet goes over the top in order to bring honor to Jael. She hammered Sisera. She shattered his skull. She smashed his head. 3 ways to describe what she did. She drove the tent peg through his temple. Between her legs he collapsed. So you see her standing over Sisera, hammering into the tent peg that goes down into his head. Between her legs he collapsed. He went limp. He was lifeless. 3 ways to describe that situation, huh? Between her legs he collapsed. Says it again, collapsed. He went limp. In the spot where he collapsed, that's the 3rd time we're told that he collapsed. In the spot where he collapsed, there he went limp. Again, the word limp is used. Violently murdered. Okay, so we have the poem of Deborah and Barak that includes a section on Jael, because she is the one to whom God sold Sisera, and to a woman, just as Deborah prophesied. Okay, so now we're on chapter 6 and the story of Gilead. Gilead, the name means hack, and that's going to play a part in the story, as most names do. Hack. Judges 6. The people of Israel did what was right in the sight, did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and Yahweh gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. Why? The people would hide there. And as you'll find out, they'll also hide their produce there. Why? Well, different from the other nations, there was no king to sit over the people of Israel, as in the Deborah story, Jabin, and in the Ehud's story and in the story concerning Othniel. There was a king. Well, this time it's not a king, it's the hordes, the people of Midian coming in just at the time when the harvest would come in and stealing the harvest, just at the time when the new sheep would be born and new donkeys would be to take all them to feed themselves. Um, so therefore, Israel was starving as though there was a famine. Um, so and the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves dens that are in the mountains and caves and the strongholds. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. So there's several countries that came, or groups of people that came up against Israel, but it's the Midianites that will be emphasized. They would encamp against Israel and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents. That's the enemy, the Midianites. They would come up with their livestock and their tents, and they would come like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they laid waste the land as they came in. Crops taken, no food left. And that's why Israel, as soon as they could, tried to hide their crops in the caves, so that they, the enemy, laid waste the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian. And the people of Israel cried out for help to Yahweh. Now, notice the sequence of what happened to Israel, because this sequence is used over and over in each of the stories of the judges. The people did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Yahweh gave them into the hand of certain people, and a description. And finally, the people of Israel cry out for help to Yahweh. And that cry is repeated in the next verse, in verse 7. When the people of Israel cried out to Yahweh on account of the Midianites, Yahweh sent, and we're expecting it to say Yahweh sent a deliverer or a judge, right? Because that's what he does every time. Nope, there's an interruption. He sends a prophet. And Yahweh sent a prophet to the people of Israel, and the prophet said to them, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppress you, and drove them out before you and gave you into their hand. And I said to you, I am Yahweh your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But you have not listened or obeyed my voice." Yeah, they've not obeyed. So the prophet comes along to tell them just what it was that caused God to put them into the hand of the Midianites. And that was that they had gone to other gods. They had committed apostasy. So their cry to the Lord was not a cry of repentance, but a cry just for help, as though he was like any other God that they would just yell out to. God, maybe we should, rather than, along with the other gods, maybe we should call on Yahweh also. And that's apostasy. Okay, so we're going to go into now the Gideon story. And the Gideon story is the fifth story in the book of Judges about a judge. He's the first one, though, that Yahweh has to send an angel of the Lord to because Gideon is going to struggle against God's will. Gideon was hard at work threshing, but he was threshing in a wine press. He's not threshing in the fields where he normally would. Why not? Because he's trying to hide the wheat before the people come against him, the Midianites. They would come and before even the work was finished or right after the work was finished and steal the wheat for themselves. So the angel of the Lord comes and appears before Gideon, and then Gideon argues with the angel of the Lord that Yahweh has abandoned them. Look at the circumstances we're in. It looks like God has abandoned us. But God hasn't. Yahweh has not abandoned them. He sent a prophet, and the people should have repented at that moment, and they don't. However, see, he conveniently ignores this. And so he's forgets the fact that he's committed apostasy. For see, Yahweh is unique from the other gods because he only is God and he demands worship only. The other gods were, so there's other gods you worship. They didn't care. There were a lot of gods. And so the Midianites not only worshiped Baal, but scores of other gods. The Israelites not only worshiped Baal, but scores of other gods. But Yahweh appears to Gideon, and Gideon then builds an altar to Yahweh and calls it Yahweh of Peace. Yahweh later returns to Gideon, and this time he has a demand. Gideon must tear down the altar that is on his property. Now, this pagan altar in his backyard, even though it was on his father's land, Joash is his father, even though Joash had built it on his land, it seems to be the community altar to Baal, that the people of the town would come there. That Joash must have had the money, whatever, to build the altar on his land, but opens it up for the community. So the pagan gods would be worshipped at this altar, and but now that Gideon had erected an altar to Yahweh himself, Yahweh is saying, no, there can't be two altars to two different gods. I am exclusive. But this altar that was on Gideon's land was an altar to Baal, and it also had a pole that was a wooden pole that was once a tree, and they would stand that up, and that represented Ashtoreth, the other god, a female god that was the consort to Baal. And God's not going to share his glory with another. He tells you that over and over in Isaiah, who also comes out against Baal. Gideon so God tells him to tear the altar to Baal down and the Ashtoreth down completely. Gideon is fearful. So he goes at night and he goes with 10 servants to tear it down. And in fact, the word is to hack it down. Remember, the word hack is the meaning of the word Gideon. So he hacks the pagan altar to pieces. The when the townspeople get up in the morning, they're furious. They're fearful, and God had told them not to fear the other gods, remember? But they're fearful of Baal. Baal might come out against them since they tore down his altar is torn down. The people of God had cried out for deliverance, hadn't they? Yet they were worshiping and fearing Baal. So when the men awoke, their altar was demolished, and in its place, an altar to Yahweh was built by Gideon and his 10 servants. And on the altar was the Ashtoreth. It was a wooden pole, so they cut that pole up and made it the wood for the altar, and they placed on it a ram to do toward Yahweh. But the people were astonished, and they wanted to kill Gideon. But Joash, his father, even though he had built the altar to Baal, and we don't know why he comes out for his son, except that he loves his son. And I guess he loves his son more than he loved Baal. Or maybe he was doubtful that Baal could do anything because the Midianites kept stealing their stuff, even though they were worshiping Baal. And so in order to protect his son, he argued that a god ought to be able to defend his own honor. Why isn't Baal defending his honor? He doesn't need men to defend his honor. And so then he names his son Jerubbaal, which means let Baal fight against him. So he's saying, if Baal wants to defend himself, he could go against Gideon. And that's what the people expected him to do. But nothing happens. Baal's failure to kill Gideon proves that Baal was weak and unworthy to be worshipped by Israel. Jerubbaal is now the new name for Gideon, and Gideon becomes famous because Baal doesn't kill him. And so the name Jerubbaal stuck, and the people would follow Gideon into battling the Midianites because of this. He didn't get killed by Baal. But you would think, after all this, that Gideon would be confident to lead his people. But he is still fearful and doubting. And so he goes to God for that famous miracle, that sign that Yahweh was stronger than Baal. So let's read the story, Gideon and Judges. The narrator says, "Now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east, so there were many, came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of Jezreel." Now, the valley of Jezreel becomes famous throughout the Old Testament. In the beginning, it's called the Valley of Jezreel. It's a very fertile plain, like a huge plain, something like 10 miles by 15 miles. And it's a natural a staging ground for battles. And later, it became named Megiddo, or as we called Armageddon. If you want to know where Armageddon is in the Old Testament, look for the Valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of, verse 34, but the Spirit of Yahweh clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites, that's, I couldn't find out who they were. So I'm figuring, I think this is an educated guess, that's his clan name. The Abiezrites were called out to follow Gideon. 35, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh because he's of the tribe of Manasseh. Now that is up north, northern part of Israel. Along with, remember last week we learned about Zebulun and Manasseh. It's just below, Zebulun and Issachar. Naphtali, Zebulun and Naphtali, and then comes Manasseh. And Asher is way up there too. So it says in verse 35, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher, to Zebulun, and Naphtali, northern Israel. And they went up to meet him. Then Gideon spoke to God. And here's what Gideon said. Here's his doubt. If you will save Israel, if God says he's going to. Israel, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. Behold, now remember, Gideon's request is going to be for a sign. Behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. Now I have to tell you about this sign. We have people, especially when I was younger, maybe not so much today, who lay out their fleece. And as though they're, showing faith, trust in God. But that is not so. This was a sign that Gideon doubted God. Not only that, but Gideon was asking for a miracle, something that would never happen in normal life. A lot of times people who lay out their fleece have, there was the possibility of doing what was asked for. But there's no possibility in the natural realm for this sign to occur. So two things are against us asking or using a fleece in our request to God. And that is, it's a sign of lack of faith, and it would have to, if it was true, it would have to be a miracle to occur. I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. Remember, the threshing floor was where he should have been threshing rather than in the wine press. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, remember, on the dew. Now, there was a dew season and a rainy season, we were told. In the dew season, dew would come so thick that sometimes it was 3 inches thick. It was good enough for certain crops that did not grow in the rainy season, would only grow in the dew season. So there were 2 seasons, the dew season and the rainy season. And it is dry on all the ground, except for on the fleece. Then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. Now, here we have the fleece, and here we have Gideon and his doubt. But he says, I'll believe you then. Just do this one thing. So the narrator says, and it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, he wrung out enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. Now, that's a lot on it, squeezing it out. Then Gideon spoke to God. Let not your anger burn against me. Reminds me, remember the story of Abraham as he prays for Sodom and Gomorrah. Just one more thing, God. Just one more thing. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry. So now it's the fleece that is to be dry. Dry on the fleece only, and on the ground let there be dew. Now this was a greater miracle than the other, I would think, because the fleece that would be there uh, on the threshing floor would be dry, but everything else wet with dew, thick dew, narrator says, and God did so that night. And it was dry on the fleece only, and on the ground there was dew. Yet still, Gideon would be fearful. How could the author of Hebrews say that Gideon was a man of faith? And yet, he does. How? Because though Gideon was fearful, he obeyed God. And that's what faith is today, too. We can be fearful, but if we obey God, then we are considered people of faith. Well, stories throughout the Old Testament show God's power over the rain and the dew. You remember the story of Elijah when Ahab, in the northern kingdom, several hundred years after Gideon, led his people into apostasy. And Yahweh stated through Elijah, neither dew nor rain is going to come till I say so. So there's that dew and that rain going to be withheld by Yahweh. Baal wouldn't be able to work against Yahweh. Yet the people are determined to follow Baal. Yahweh, not Baal, controlled the dew and the rain. I know I say that over and over again. Yahweh, not Baal. But that's what is said throughout the Old Testament. It's Yahweh that controls the rain and the dew. 3 years later, after the famine has started, no rain, no dew, Elijah comes along and calls the prophets, hundreds of prophets, to Baal, to Mount Carmel, to have a test. Elijah told the prophets of Baal to make an altar for Baal on Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal do so. And they spend the next few hours and hours and hours, even into the afternoon, crying and praying to Baal to send down fire. Now remember what we told you, that is lightning, to send down lightning that would hit the altar and cause a fire to consume the ram that was on the firewood. So they're crying out, and of course you remember that Elijah mocks them, even saying, is he sleeping? Is he going potty? And it's a very laughable story. Crying for fire to come out of heaven and start a fire for the sacrifice. But when it is Elijah's turn, it is Yahweh who sends the lightning down after one very short prayer. Even though Baal is pictured in our archaeological digs, we've uncovered pictures of Baal holding a lightning bolt in his hand, yet he was not able to provide rain. So that's one story. Another story is that you don't think of this in the story of Ruth, but it is. It starts out with a famine. Remember that? It's the time of Judges, and that time the people of Israel are falling away from God and going into apostasy. And during that time, in Ruth, the book of Ruth is told. The story of Ruth is told. um, and there's famine. And after 10 years, where they moved to Moab, after 10 years, it tells us that Yahweh visited his people and gave them bread. Now, what does it mean when it says, and Yahweh visited his people? Well, we don't think of it. We get our bread from the store. And no matter how much of a famine in your own town or state, it, no, we can get it from another state or another country, whatever. So what does this mean to the Israelites when they hear Yahweh visited his people? Well, in this circumstance, it meant Yahweh had sent rain and dew. Yeah. So I just thought I'd read to you some more things. You don't have a paper with this, but I looked up more verses on God, Yahweh, the God of rain and dew. And one is in 2 Samuel, and it's a song, a psalm by David in 2 Samuel 22:10-15. You can write that down and read it later. But I want you to listen carefully to all that's talked about God and rain. Yahweh bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet. Yahweh rode on a cherub and flew. He was seen in the wings of the wind. He made darkness around him his canopy, thick clouds, a gathering of water. Out of the brightness before him, coals of fire flamed forth, lightning. Yahweh thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his thunder or voice or coal. Remember that word, that Hebrew word. And Yahweh sent out arrows, that's lightning, and scattered them, that's the lightning, and routed them, that's David's enemies. So God could come and visit his people with rain and dew and provide for them. But also Yahweh could come as the same thunderstorm to rout David's enemies or our enemies. So judgment or deliverance, God comes as a thunderstorm. Psalm 97, Yahweh reigns, let the earth rejoice. Let the many coastlands be glad. Clouds and thick darkness are all around him. Righteous, we look at those clouds coming and the thick darkness coming, and what we do? Oh no, another rainy day. And but for the Israelites who wanted the rain to come, it was a glorious, wonderful thing. But again, for the enemy, it was a horror. It was a fearful thing. Verse 3 says, fire or lightning goes before him and burns up his adversaries all around. His lightnings light up the world. The earth sees and trembles. And remember that storm theophany. Psalm 104, bless Yahweh, O my soul. O Yahweh, my God, you are very great. You're clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He, Yahweh, lays the beams of his chambers on the water. He, Yahweh, makes the clouds his chariot. Yahweh rides on the wings of the wind. Yahweh makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. Isaiah 19:1 says, behold, Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud, the cloud rider. And then we have Daniel 7. And I'd like you to open up your Bible to Daniel 7, verse 13 and 14, because this is the most important. You remember, as you're looking it up, I'll give you some background. You remember that in Daniel we have someone who looks like a son of man. or a human being coming in the clouds. Remember. Okay, so hopefully you have Daniel 7. And in verse 13, got it? Daniel said, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, that's Yahweh, and was presented before him. And to him, that's the Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Now, what's very interesting about this is Yahweh is always the cloud rider, and here the Son of Man is a cloud rider. But another interesting thing, all these accolades for this Son of Man, his dominion, and he has a kingdom and a dominion. All people should serve him. It won't pass away. His kingdom will not be destroyed. All those things were said by Nebuchadnezzar the chapter before about Yahweh. And now these things are said about this Son of Man. Now that should get you to think, who is the Son of Man? He sounds like Yahweh, doesn't he? In all the Gospels in the New Testament, when Jesus is before the Sanhedrin, Jesus claims to be the cloud rider. He's the one that's before the Sanhedrin. He states that this Son of Man is Jesus himself. He's the Son of Man that's riding on the clouds. And remember our song, Behold, he comes. That's Jesus, riding on a cloud, shining like the sun at the trumpet call.